Good afternoon and welcome back to Planet Doug Behind the Scenes for Thursday, June 27th. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I just had lunch at one of my neighborhood restaurants. And post-lunch, I thought I'd talk a little bit about behind-the-scenes activities here on Planet Doug. And I do have as I always do, I have a technology story. This one is a small one, but I like it. It's very funny, very tragic, but it also illustrates how problems with technology come in so many shapes and sizes. And as I've often said, I don't hear other people talk about all the problems that I run into. There just seem to be a jungle of issues that I always face, and no one else ever seems to mention them. And I suppose this one kind of falls into that category. So this is a bit of a show and tell because it's hard to explain in words, but this is my MacBook laptop that I use for all my editing. And as you can see, it has two USB-C Thunderbolt ports on the side, and that's it. So there's nothing else here, nothing here, nothing here. There are no ports except those two. So everything I plug into the laptop has to go into one of these two. And because the battery in this laptop is dead, I always have to have power in one of them. So one of them is always occupied by the power cord, which leaves one USB port for everything else. And this gets a bit tricky because notice how close together they are. But notice how close together they are. And because they're so close together, a lot of things just won't fit. So for example, I have this flash drive, has a USB-C port on it, a plug on it, and I use this to transfer files from smartphones to computers, things like that. But it won't fit because it's too wide. This pushes it off to the side, and this is too wide to be able to fit in there because the plug won't go into the port, so that won't fit. And that happens all the time. And recently I've been talking a lot about buying a new memory card reader, and I went out into the city of Delat and I bought this memory card reader, which has USB-C on one side and USB-A on the other. And when I first bought it, it also would not fit because it's too wide and the plug won't fit in. But it turned out that it was too wide because there was a little plastic lanyard hook on the side where you can attach a lanyard, a little cord. There was a plastic loop over here, and that loop hit this thing, pushed it over to the side, and then the plug would not fit into the port. So I thought, okay, well, I don't really need that piece of plastic. I usually like to attach lanyards to things, like even this little flash drive. I put a little cord on it. It helps me keep track of things, and I find if I have a lanyard, I don't lose them. So I would like to put a lanyard on here, but I don't absolutely have to. So what I did was I got out one of my tools. I have a Leatherman with some very sharp blades, and I took the blade and then I carefully sawed off the little plastic loop. It was very small. It didn't take a lot of work, but I sawed through it and it popped off and it went flying somewhere. I don't know where it went. So now, because I had made this thing less wide, now it could actually fit side by side. So I was very pleased with myself. I managed. It doesn't quite fit. You can see how it pushes the power cord on an angle because there isn't quite enough room, but you can kind of jam it in there and it just makes enough room. So I thought, okay, that's par for the course on Planet Doug. Everything I buy, I have to modify it in some way because nothing ever quite fits together. And I have to glue things and saw things off and bend things and twist things, add adapters, because nothing ever quite fits. But this time I got it to fit. So there I was with my laptop all fixed. I've got my memory card reader able to plug in. And then I was working on my laptop. Of course, I had the LCD screen open like this. I finished whatever work I was doing, powered down the laptop, and then I closed the lid. And when I got to here, I heard this horrible crunching, cracking sound. And it turns out what had happened was the little plastic loop that I cut off the flash drive and it went flying. It landed on the keyboard and went down into this hinge area and was jammed in between the laptop and the LCD screen. So, and there's like, it catches it in there. There's a little ledge in there. And then when I closed this, I closed it on top of that little piece of plastic and it shattered the bottom of the LCD screen. Crack, crunch, crackle. And then when I opened it up, there's, you can't see it on the GoPro, but the bottom of the LCD screen is all cracked open. There's a big chunk of it missing. And ever since that happened, little pieces of glass and plastic shards have been falling out of there because it's a pretty bad break. But as you can see, the LCD screen still works. So man, when I heard that crunching and crackling, and then I opened up the laptop, I was fully expecting to see that the whole LCD screen was dead because I broke it. But it turns out I shattered the bottom part of the glass, but for whatever reason, it didn't break anything vital. So I still have a working laptop. But man, the number of things you have to keep an eye out for is almost endless. And I've talked about this before in my life, that you'd think as you grow, get older, you make all these mistakes, and then you're supposed to learn from your mistakes. But the world is so complicated, there's no limit to the variety of mistakes you can make. So like a big mistake like this, well, I'm never going to do that again, but I would never be in a situation where it would ever happen again. Like, when is the next time? Like, okay, now I've learned my lesson. Whenever you cut a loop off your memory card reader, make sure it doesn't fall into the hinge on your MacBook Pro. Like, when is that ever going to happen again? So it's a lesson that I learned, but it's not a lesson I'll ever be able to apply in real life because, yeah, life is so complicated. Another story from Planet Doug that's on my mind is not technology related, but it's definitely something that happens a lot in life. But this one definitely had a twist. And it's kind of a Larry David story. It's a Curb Your Enthusiasm type of story in which one problem was staying in any kind of hotel, particularly a low-budget hotel, is noise levels and how loud or quiet your neighbors are. Every time you move into a new hotel, it's like spinning a roulette wheel, and you never know what you're going to get. You could get a nightmare of nothing but crazy noise that keeps you up all night long, or you could get perfect quiet and a wonderful place to stay. You just never know. Though I must say that in Asia in general, the roulette wheel tends to land on the noisy side. It's just because of the style of life here, the style of construction. Everything is designed to make a lot of noise. So this low-budget hotel, for example, it's an older building and has a lot of big, heavy furniture, wooden furniture, and the doors, when you close them, will slam. So people here just slam the door like crazy, and it goes off like a nuclear bomb. Luckily, I have earplugs. Ever since I moved to Asia, to be honest, without earplugs, I think I would have died from lack of sleep 20 years ago. I never would have been able to survive here without earplugs because that's the only way I'm able to get any sleep at all. But man, yeah. Here, to be honest, in this hotel, even earplugs don't help because when people move out. Again, people here tend to arrive at hotels late and check out early, as opposed to arriving early and checking out late. They do the opposite. So early in the morning, entire families. And again, that's part of the local culture too. There's like big rooms on either side of me. I'm in a small room, but there's big rooms on both ends of the hall, and they're meant for families. So you'll get like 6 people in a room with children, and the noise level is like crazy, crazy loud. And when they're packing up in the morning, the slamming of doors, the slamming of suitcases, just nobody could sleep through that, even with earplugs. So that's just a normal part of life, and I'm accustomed to it. But yesterday, something new happened, or I dealt with it in a new way, let's put it that way, because a family arrived, husband, wife, son, and very young daughter. Not a baby, but tiny, toddler kind of daughter, but old enough to have a real powerful voice. And this little girl just screamed all the time, just nonstop. I've never seen or heard any child in my life as loud as this little girl. And what astonished me in general, and what aroused my curiosity, was how tolerant her parents were. They were young, that's a young family, young father and mother, and this little girl was just so out of control, and both parents seemed completely oblivious to it. Didn't seem to bother them, which just astonishes me, and of course had no concern for how much that little girl was bothering everyone around them all the time. So there was one funny moment earlier in the day, because I was here in my room getting ready to go out for lunch, and I was just about to go out. I was getting dressed and getting organized to go out for lunch, and I heard this series of explosions, just boom, 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 like shaking the walls, and it just went on for such a long time. And I was just sitting here in my room, as I always do. I hear so much noise in Asia, and I'm always playing detective. Like, what could possibly be happening to make that kind of noise? And this time, I just couldn't figure it out. I thought, it's like a team in a room here with sledgehammers banging through a wall, hammering on cement with sledgehammers. Like, what could this be? And I just went on and on, boom, boom, boom. And I thought, I don't know what this is. Anyway, I was ready to go out from my room, so I went out, locked the door behind me, and I started going down the stairs here. I'm up on the 3rd floor, and there's a lot of flights of stairs going all the way down to the bottom, and they are old school, heavy-duty wooden stairs, big wooden balustrade, is that what you call it? Wooden steps all the way down. And then as I started at the top of the stairs and started walking down, I heard this booming noise from directly below me, and it seemed to be moving down the stairs. So then I walked down all the flights of stairs, and when I got to the very last flight, I saw the source of the booming noise, and it was the little girl standing on 2 feet at a time, and every single step, she jumped in the air, boom, and landed on the step beneath her. And then she paused, leapt into the air, boom, onto the next one. And apparently she had done that the entire stairway, all the way down. And her mother and father, mother was holding her by the hand, they went at her pace, because she was very, very slow, and was jumped on every single step, and the mother and father just sort of walked with her very slowly and let her do that all the way from the top of the stairs all the way down to the bottom. And it was that unbelievable booming noise that I heard. And again, I saw them ahead of me, and I thought, wow. I was very happy to have the mystery solved, so I'm not going to stay up at night trying to figure out this mystery. But the other mystery is, I don't know, it's just parents who would let their child do that in a hotel, create that much noise all the way down to the bottom, let alone the damage she may or may not be doing to the wooden stairway. If I were the owner of the hotel, I would not be pleased with that. Anyway, so that was one of my early encounters with this little girl, this little demon. And then throughout the entire day, I had lunch, I came back here, I was editing video, and then I started to hear the screaming. This little girl just screaming and screaming and screaming. I hear crashing noises, I hear banging noises. It sounds like, I don't know, 5 people in a room having a brawl, and one of those persons is just screaming at the top of her lungs. It just went on and on and on and on. And for a while I was able to ignore it because, as I said, that's normal for this part of the world. You just get a lot of noise. Families in all these rooms, they're going to be loud, they're going to be noisy. So nothing you can do about it. You just put in earplugs, put in earphones, listen to music, do whatever you need to do to tune it out, because you're just not going to be able to stop it. Your only option is to endure it or leave the country. Those are the only choices you have. There's nothing in between. But in this case, it went on for so long, and it was so extreme, unlike anything I'd heard before. I ended up being really curious. It's like, what is going on? It was so loud, for example, that the one thing I thought was, well, the door to the hotel room has to be open. There's no way that noise is getting out of a hotel room, maybe even on a different floor, down the hallway, through my closed doors, into my ears. The door to that room has to be open. So I thought, at the very, very least, short of complaining to the parents, short of that, I really want to know what is happening. So I thought, okay, I can pretend that I'm going outside my room to do something, and then I can walk down to the lobby and look down all the halls and look for this open door, and then maybe I can walk down that hallway and then glance in the room, and I can see what is going on in that room that could be making this kind of noise, and why is this girl screaming at the top of her lungs for so long? This made no sense to me at all. So I went out into the hallway here, and I didn't have to go very far, because it turned out the noise was coming from the room just to the left of mine. That's where the screaming and all the noise was coming from, on my floor, and the door was closed. And these are heavy, thick doors, and the amount of noise that was coming through that door was unbelievable. So anyway, I stepped outside of my room, and I was like, oh, hokey doodle, that's where it's all taking place. So I satisfied my curiosity. I didn't see what was going on, but at least I knew what room it was coming from. And then I came back into my room, closed the door, settled onto my laptop, just started working again, and the screaming just went on and on and on until it got to the point where I decided that, okay, this is nuts. This is beyond anything that's reasonable. Any normal, reasonable human being at this point has the right to go just give a little tap on the door and say, like, what's up? This is so insane. You have to stop whatever's going on in this room. This does not make any sense on this planet. Please, can you please just do something about the screaming child? So I was making up my mind to go do this, and I was trying to think how to do it, because I'm not the type of person to make a scene. I don't like to cause trouble. I usually just let things happen around me, and then I adjust to my situations. Noise, earplugs. Too much noise, leave the room for a while, go somewhere else, come back. I'm not the type of person to go out of my way to tell other people how to behave and what to do. I don't like to cause trouble. I just like to live a quiet life. So in this case, though, it was so extreme, even I had to go do something. And then I thought, well, I knock on the door, Maybe someone opens the door, the father, the mother, then what? What do I do? They won't speak English. And then I had this idea to make it palatable for me and for them. And the more I thought about it, it was actually kind of reasonable. It might even have been the truth. So what I did was I got my phone and I opened up Google Translate and I wrote in English, is there something wrong with your baby? Do you need a doctor? Because the screaming was so loud, was so intense, it sounded like it could be coming from someone in pain. And then as soon as I typed that out, so what I was going to do was knock on their door. When they opened the door, I was going to show them in Google Translate, and I was just basically wanted to convey concern for the child. I didn't want to come across as complaining. I just wanted to say, hey, is everything okay in here? Do you guys need a doctor? I mean, sounds ridiculous, but once I typed that out, I started thinking about it, and I thought, for all I know, that could be the truth, because the screaming was so terrible. It could be someone in pain, and I was sitting here thinking about it, and I thought, how in the world can the parents of a child be in a room? It's a bigger room than mine, but it's still a small hotel room. How can anyone be in that room with that child and not stop her from screaming like that? How could you not lose your mind? Nobody could bear it. I'm in a different room. I couldn't even bear it anymore. How could anyone in the room with the child keep their sanity? In my mind, it's not possible. I couldn't imagine any situation where an adult would be in a room with a little girl screaming like that and would just let it go on for this long. So I was thinking, maybe she's alone in there. Like maybe the parents left her alone in the room and she is in trouble, and that's why she's screaming all the time. Maybe she's hurt. Maybe, who knows? And it didn't seem reasonable to me. I didn't really think that could be true. But once I typed out my little message about, do you guys need a doctor? I thought, And then you hear so many stories of people who hear cries for help and ignore it. And then it turns out someone was in trouble, because they don't want to get involved, and someone ends up badly hurt because nobody intervened. I did not want to be that person, so I thought, I don't know, I can be a good citizen of the world and go knock on that door and just poke my head inside and say, hey, is everything okay in here? Can I help? Do you guys need a doctor? So that's what I did. I wrote all that out. I went outside and knocked on the door. Girl inside, screaming, screaming, screaming. I hear a bang, I hear a bang, I hear a crash, screaming, screaming. No answer. I knock again, no answer. And I have no choice but to go away. And I was thinking, maybe I've got to go get the manager of the hotel, someone with a key to that door, because maybe I'm right. Maybe that little girl is in there in real trouble and she's screaming for help. And I was just about to do that, go find the manager of the hotel. And then I thought, no, let's knock again, but don't do a diffident knock, knock, knock. Let's hit that door and let them know that I'm out here, because maybe they didn't even hear me. So I came back into my room and I was thinking what to do. And I thought, okay, let's go for round 2. And then I went out and then I went to the door and I hit it really hard, like not a thumping with my fist or anything, but knuckles. But I knocked loud enough that anybody in the room had to hear me. And then I heard an adult male voice, some talking, something, and then the door opened and the father was there. I recognized him, and then I got out my, do you need, is there something wrong with your daughter? Do you need a doctor? And I got him to read it in Vietnamese. And then I looked down and the little girl was right there. He was sort of standing beside her. And then she was looking up at me, of course, and she stopped screaming when the door opened, because I was more interested. I was more interesting to her than the screaming. And then while I was standing in the door, and the father, he didn't open the door wide, but he opened it, and I could look into the room, and I saw the son sitting on a bed playing some sort of a video game. So the son was completely happy to play his video game while his sister was screaming for hours nonstop. And then the father was in the room, so he apparently had no trouble just letting her scream. And then he kind of looked at me and read the message and just, no, everything, whatever he said in Vietnamese, and I didn't understand what he said, but he was indicating with body language that no, everything's fine, everything is fine, no problem. And I was like, okay, all right, just checking. I'm smiling, I'm being polite. And then I came back into my room, closed the door, screaming, just started all over again. And then later on, the screaming died down, and then I never heard it again. So my intervention did something, because I think they left the hotel, because the screaming stopped later, but there was no other noise. And those kids were making a lot of noise all the time. So if that family was still in that room and they were going in and out of the hotel, I would have heard them. The doors would have been slamming, the chairs would have been crashing, there would have been a lot of noise, even without the screaming, and I heard nothing. So I think they basically took this mad, or not mad, I mean by mad, I mean crazy, this crazy foreigner knocking on their door and asking them if they need a doctor. It may have freaked them out, and I think they just moved to another hotel, because I haven't seen anything of them. And this was in the afternoon, so it's not like they in the morning and then they checked out and left. This was afternoon going into evening, and as far as I can tell, they were there for another night. But I never heard another peep, not a noise from any of them. So I don't know what happened. Feels like even if they moved out with their luggage, I would have heard that, because they would have made as much noise as an army on the move. A lot of people here with their suitcases drag them down the steps rather than carry them, and the suitcases will bang, bang, bang on the steps all the way down as well. I would have heard them doing that. I would have heard the boy screaming and yelling and shouting too, because he was pretty noisy as well. So anyway, that is my story, my Larry David Curb Your Enthusiasm story. It's like, excuse me, is your daughter okay? Do you need a doctor? Do you want me to call a doctor? Yeah, crazy story, but hey, that's life on planet Doug. Another story I thought I could tell today on Behind the Scenes goes back to Saigon again. I'm catching up on all of my experiences from Saigon to the best of my ability. And I just told the story of going to the Mekong Delta. And I went to the Delta on one of the classic one-day tours, a group tour out of Saigon, where I got picked up in a bus with 20 other people and spent the whole day in this group tour environment with a guide who spoke English, and had a really wonderful time. I had a great day in the Mekong Delta tour. And when I concluded that video, my conclusion was, wow, tours are kind of cool. And I thought I should do more of them. And the next one that sprung to mind was going to the Cu Chi tunnels. These, of course, are famous in Saigon. If you made a list of, say, the 5 things that tourists are recommended to do while they're in Saigon, one on that list would be visiting the Cu Chi tunnels, which is a section of underground tunnels that were dug by the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War. And apparently the section of tunnels that we can visit as a tourist are just part of a vast network of underground tunnels that when you read about them online and in the brochures, things like that, they say that these tunnels stretch over the entire country. And then the Cu Chi tunnels have been preserved and are open to foreign visitors. And in fact, I went there myself back in 1995, my first visit to Vietnam way back then. I went to the Cu Chi tunnels, and I have a couple of pictures from that time. No pictures of me being there, I don't think, but I have pictures of other people, and I don't have very strong memories of what happened on that first visit. I have a few memories kicking around, but nothing very detailed. So I thought, since I'm in Saigon, why don't I go again? And now that I'm making YouTube videos, I can go a second time and shoot a video about it. And of course, it is kind of it's a very visceral, very visual experience visiting the Cu Chi tunnels. It's not a dry museum because part of the experience is to actually go into the tunnels. And these tunnels, of course, the original ones were dug by the Viet Cong, and they are a lot shorter back in those days than I am. So for most foreign tourists from the West, for us to get into those tunnels is a bit of a challenge. And I think most of the ones that you can go into have been widened, and they've made them a bit taller. They're still small, but they widened them and made them taller so that bigger foreigners can get through them. And they have a couple of the tunnels that they left in their original condition. But part of the experience of going there is to go into the tunnels yourself. That's part of the experience. And tons and tons of YouTube videos have been shot about this place. And the classic thumbnail that everybody uses is this one entrance to a tunnel that has like a little trap door on the top, emphasis on little, and then it has dirt and grass on top of the trap door to add camouflage. And then it's a very narrow opening to go down into the tunnels. And then if you get your picture taken or you shoot video of this experience, what people do is go into the tunnel. Half of their body is inside the tunnel, and then they're holding the lid, the camouflage lid, up above their heads, and then they go down into the tunnel and then pull the lid into place behind them to illustrate how the Viet Cong would have escaped into the tunnel. The Americans are chasing them, and they're running through the jungle, and then the Viet Cong will come to one of their secret tunnels, lift the camouflage cover, get down, pull the cover back into place, and now they're hidden underground, and the American soldiers can't find them. And then as a visitor, you recreate that moment by holding that. So if you see any thumbnails on YouTube of someone half of their body underground, half above ground, and they're holding this tiny square of wood with mud and grass on top, that's them going into the Cu Chi tunnels. So I did that before, but I thought I would go there and do it again. And as I said, a Planet Doug subscriber booked the Mekong Delta tour for me, made all the arrangements, and then I was in communication with this mystery benefactor and reported back to him about how amazing the Mekong Delta tour was, how much I enjoyed it. And then he suggested, well, would you like to go on the Cu Chi Tunnel tour as well? And I said, yeah, I'd love to. And then he booked that for me as well and made the arrangements. So that was all set up. And then the time came. This time they came and picked me up at my hotel for the Mekong Delta tour. I made arrangements to go to the tour company offices. But this Cu Chi Tunnels tour was happening very quickly. I didn't have lead time, really. It was booked and then it was happening. And there really wasn't an opportunity to do a lot of detective work to figure out the name of the tour company. Then the Mekong Delta company was SST Travel. And I had a good experience with them. And I just assumed for some reason that the Cu Chi Tunnels tour would be with the same company. So I had confidence in the company, so I didn't really need to go to the office or anything like that. So they just said, like when you sign up for the tour, you give them the name of your hotel, and then they communicate with you by email or WhatsApp the night before the tour, and they say, we will be at your hotel at this time. And I arranged to be down in the lobby waiting for when they showed up. So this time they came to my hotel. I got onto the bus and then off we went. It's about, well, let me check the exact distance. I had the number in my head, but I've forgotten. It's a little bit of a drive to get out to the Coochie tunnels. It's not as close as you might think. I just did the Google Maps thing, and from my hotel to the Coochie tunnels was 55 kilometers. But as I discovered when I got on the bus, it was through very slow, gradual traffic. So it estimates that driving your own car would take an hour and 45 minutes. If you tried to go there by local bus, according to Google, it was going to take you almost 4 hours, and you'd have to go through at least 4 different buses. You keep changing from bus to bus to bus. And it would take you 4 hours to get there. By motorcycle, an hour and 45 minutes again. 12 hours if you want to walk. So it's 55 kilometers away. I got on the bus, and right from the start, I have to say that this particular tour, I don't even remember the name of the company, to be honest. I don't remember the name of the tour company. But anyway, it was not as good as my experience with SST. Just everything about it was not quite on the same level, where the guide was more difficult to understand. He didn't really seem to know anything about the Coochie tunnels. He didn't take them seriously. He didn't take the history seriously. And he clearly had a lot of trouble understanding questions, because people in the group were asking him questions throughout the day. And I noticed that he never really answered any of their questions because he didn't hear what they said. And then he just kind of made an assumption about what it was they probably said, and he would answer a question, but it wasn't the question they actually asked. And this sort of happened all day. So yeah, the guide was not at the same level as Hui from SST Travel. And the experience overall was not also on the same level. Maybe it's a personal preference thing, because I was on the bus, we're going quite slowly to get there, and then we stopped. About halfway there, we pulled into what they called a handicapped handicraft center. The place was called Lampat. I assume that's a Vietnamese name. Lampat Company. Handicraft since 1976. And the idea was that this organization or this company gave a way to handicap people to make a living. That if they were not able to get other work, they could live and work at this handicraft center, make handicrafts, and then sell them to visitors, whether foreign or local. And they had a particular focus on anyone that had a physical handicap because of Agent Orange from the Vietnam War. That's part of their overall mandate, their philosophy, which is all well and good, but the way I was in my mood, I didn't want to go there right away. I was thinking about the tunnels. We're on our way to the Coochie tunnels. It's taking a long time to get there. And the way my brain and body works, I only have so much gas in the tank. And I want to arrive at the tunnels when my tanks are full, so I can use all of my energy, all of my focus for the main event, Coochie tunnels. And then if we're stopping at this handicraft center and we're there for an hour and a half or however long it was going to be, I'm already running out of energy. Now I'm using prime early morning time before I'm getting to the Coochie tunnels. So personally, I would have preferred it the other way around. If we're going, the main event is the Coochie tunnels, that's where I want to go. So let's get there, let's have that experience, and then on our way back to Saigon, you can tack on this visit to the handicraft center. Maybe other people feel differently. They don't mind having a little bit of a pre-tunnel experience, but same thing when we went to the Mekong Delta. I saw some other tours. I was looking at their itinerary for the Mekong Delta, and I noticed that some of them, they go from Ho Chi Minh City, and then they stop off at a pagoda and at a little place here. And then you get on the boat to go out into the Mekong Delta, into the river, into the islands. My tour was different. We went straight to the boat, got on the boat, and went out. And then our last thing was going to the pagoda. And I preferred that. That was so much better. I wouldn't have liked it if we spent 2 hours on the bus to go to the Delta, and then the first thing we do is visit a pagoda. It's like, I love a good pagoda. I enjoy visiting them. They all have their own story, their own history. But I don't want to go there right away. I'm there for the Mekong Delta tour. Let's go to the Delta. Let's get out on the water. Let's do that first while I'm full of energy, and then we can go to the pagoda afterwards. So for the Cuchi tunnels, I would have preferred it to go straight there, and then we could have visited this handicraft center afterwards. So my heart wasn't really in it. When we got to the handicraft center, I was just sort of like, come on, let's go. I mean, they gave us a tour, and it was interesting to see, and I shot video while I was there, and if you watch my video from the Cuchi tunnels, you'll see the place I'm talking about, and they did some beautiful work there, but I didn't really sink my teeth into the place. I was there kind of casually because my brain was only thinking about the tunnels. So anyway, we got to the Cuchi tunnels, and just like a lot of the museums that I visited, they had a whole bunch of weaponry on display outside the main complex. So there was like a tank, helicopter, a big transport plane, a jet, artillery, things like that spread out. And the first thing we did when we got off the bus was to go look at these things. And I enjoyed that because they were different from the museums. I was kind of surprised when we went to the museums to see what good condition all the tanks were. Everything was restored and in perfect condition, and everything was painted, and everything looked not new, like not in battle-ready condition, but everything looked pretty nice. But everything at Cuchi tunnels, all that stuff had been through a war, had been through a battle, and it was pretty clear. I think the message was, okay, these are all the weapons of the Americans, and they lost, and look what we did to their big industrial weapons. We destroyed them because everything was blown up. Everything was in ruins. The Huey helicopter was just a shell. Everything had been ripped out of it, and it was badly damaged. And you could actually climb into the helicopter. I didn't know you could do that. It's not like there was a sign that said, please climb into it. But everyone in our group did, and I think our guide was encouraging people, sure, yeah, just go into the helicopter, sit in the pilot's seat, and we'll take a picture of you in the Huey. And so I did as well. I climbed into it and took some video on the inside. And as I said, the tank that was there was just completely destroyed. Looked like not a bomb had hit it, but many bombs had hit it. And a big transport, I forget what kind it was, a C-30 or C-130 or something like that. And that was a little bit interesting because everyone in my tour group, of course, was coming from all over the world, people from countries all over the world, and from many different walks of life. And because of that, they brought different attitudes. Everybody came there with preconceived notions of what the Cuchi tunnels was all about and what the experience was going to be like. And there were some people in our group who treated it very much like a visit to Disneyland. So like if you want to put things on a spectrum, like in terms of the attitude, way on one end of the spectrum would be treating it like a lark, like a big goof, like you're at Disneyland and just having fun. You're posing with Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and riding on roller coasters. And on the other end of the extreme was treating the Cuchi tunnels as a symbol of pain and misery and a fight against oppression and tyranny, and treating it like a tragic place. You're visiting a place that is symbolic of the tragedy of war and getting very emotional about it. And we had people in our group who were at both extremes. And I found that to be quite interesting because our guide as well was doing his job as a guide, and he was helping people take selfies. So he was encouraging everyone to stand in front of the helicopter or the jet or the tank, and then he would take their phone. And as part of his job was to give us a good guide experience. He would let people pose, and then he'd take their picture. And then the people who were on the Disneyland end were treating it like a bit of a joke, and they're all pretending they've got guns and things like, and they're shooting each other and doing crazy gestures and treating it like a joke, basically, and having their picture taken in front of the helicopter and the tank and all these things. And then there were other people in our group. The guide turned to them and said, "Oh, now it's your turn. You pose in front of the helicopter and I'll take your picture." And these people were treating it more as a tragedy, and they said no. They said, I can't even look at these. I'm going to cry because of the meaning of these weapons. They've killed people. And they took the whole place very seriously, and they refused to even have their picture taken as a selfie because they felt that would be disrespectful. And I guess me, since I was shooting video and because of my personality, I'm not really sure where I was on the spectrum. Probably right in the middle, I guess, because I was certainly not affected emotionally in any way. So it's not like I was overwhelmed by the tragedy of war symbolized by the Coochie tunnels or anything like that. But I'm also not going to pose in front of these weapons and treat it all like a joke. So I was sort of in the middle, I guess. So we did that at the outside, and then we went in. Everything was very well organized. The guide had something on his phone to indicate how many people were in his group, and we had to go through a ticket booth, and they scanned things, and then it was run through a computer or whatever ticketing system they had, and then we all went through the turnstile, and then we each got a sticker. I think they put it on our shoulders, a sticker to show that we had paid our entrance fee to go into the Coochie Tunnels site. And I remember our guide telling us to be very careful to stay with the group because he didn't want any of us getting lost. And I guess that makes a lot of sense. I see a lot of stories on YouTube of people, like experienced hikers. There was one quite recently from the United States. I was watching the video about this experience, or maybe it was in the news, but it was an experienced hiker going into what you'd think was a relatively small, national park or state park, and then they get lost because you're on the trail and you take 5 steps off the trail, turn around, you can't see the trail anymore. Next thing you know, you're lost in the forest for 10 days, and you're thinking, how can that be? Because the park doesn't seem big enough for you to be lost for that length of time, but it happens all the time. So out there, we're sort of in the countryside. We're in a little bit of a bushy area, I guess. It didn't seem like you could get lost out there, but our guide did say, okay, stay with me. Don't wander off because you can get lost out here. And maybe they were thinking of the tunnels as well, that maybe, as they said in all the descriptions, the tunnels we could go into was just a tiny piece of the overall complex, which stretched out in all directions. And for all we knew, there were tunnels everywhere underground around us. And if you go off the trail, maybe you could step into an abandoned tunnel and fall through, or maybe someone goes into another tunnel that they're not supposed to get into and they get lost or stuck underground. So they were treating safety relatively seriously here, and we all stuck together as a group. So we were out there walking along the trails. It was very nice, a lot of trees, very pleasant to be in the shade. And one of the interesting things about the trip was, I don't know if this happens only at certain seasons, certain months of the year, I don't know, but there happened to be big insects out there. Let me double check the name because I always get these backwards. I just double checked to make sure I have this straight. These were millipedes, giant millipedes. And I'm very familiar with these millipedes. I've seen them all over Asia. When I was in Sumatra, they were everywhere. And a long time ago, even before I was a YouTuber, I remember staying at Lake Toba, and I had this tiny single room, no bathroom, nothing like that, a very inexpensive, simple place. And for whatever reason, these giant millipedes would come in all the time. The area was filled with them, and then they would come up to my door, and there was a gap underneath the door, and they come into my room. And this actually happened all over Sumatra, now that I think about it. And then this millipede, see, I was going to say centipede, but it's actually a millipede, would come in and then just crawl all over the place, and eventually go under the door and disappear again. So I've had a lot of experiences with them. I've taken video of them, taken pictures of them. I've left them in my room. They can just wander around. I'm not worried about them because they're not dangerous. But they were all over the place at Kuchi tunnels, everywhere. They were all over the place. And then some of the people in my group obviously didn't have as much experience with them as I did, and they were freaked out by them and thought that they were deadly, venomous creatures, and were kind of freaked out by them. So that was kind of amusing. And then, yeah, we did the tour. And yeah, the tour, as I said, the highlight of the tour is going underground. And that was the most dramatic moment of the tour. When we get to these tunnels, we started off at a kind of a display center with a lot of weapons, a lot of guns. And this comes up later in the story, so I'll mention now that when our guide was talking about all the weapons used in the Vietnam War, he mentioned that the American gun, the main gun, was the M16, and he said that the M16 was notorious because it would jam all the time. And a lot of Americans died because of that, he was saying, because in the middle of battles, they would be trying to fire at the enemy, and their M16, covered in mud or whatever, would jam, and they wouldn't be able to fire their weapon. And then he was talking about the Russian AK-47 as being much more reliable, a better weapon. So he was presenting it as an advantage that the Viet Cong had, that their AK-47s were more reliable than the American M16s. So that's what he said at the beginning, and I'll refer to this later on. It comes up again. But then we looked at all that. There was a display, a big map of the Kuchi Tunnel area with a diorama showing the tunnel complex, how it was constructed, all the different layers, and the different rooms, underground kitchens and hospitals and things like that, and showing how the tunnels would go onto like river banks and escape routes, and how they had a special series of a tunnel with kind of ledges all the way through it, so they could have a fire underground, but then the smoke from the fire would go through this special chimney that by the time it got to the surface, there was no more smoke that was visible coming up out of the ground. And then they had these long, narrow shafts that were meant for ventilation, to get air down into the tunnels. So you saw all that in the diorama, and the guide talked about that and told us a bunch of other stories. And there were some mannequins there showing the different styles of uniform for the South Vietnamese fighters that were fighting with the North, and the Viet Cong, their uniforms, things like that. And then we came up to the tunnels, and then it was an opportunity for us to go into the tunnels. And then the guide said to our group that, okay, anyone who wants to, you can go into the tunnel. And there was the usual speech and the signs saying, well, if you're suffering from high blood pressure, any kind of these diseases or physical problems, heart problems, don't go into the tunnels because you could suffer down there and get in trouble. And so everyone in our group had to decide, who are they? Are they the type of tourist who goes into the tunnels, or are they the type that lets other people go through? They're happy to stay on the surface. You had to decide for yourself what kind of a tourist you were. And of course, me with my GoPro, I was having a lot of trouble with the GoPro, by the way, overheating again. That was a big problem that day because it was so hot out there. And I was still shooting in 4K all the time, trying to take advantage of the power of the GoPro Hero 12. But yeah, I had a lot of trouble because it overheated and shut down all the time. But anyway, I was shooting video with the GoPro. And because I was shooting video, of course, I was going to go into the tunnels. I think even if I wasn't shooting video, I would have done it. Why not? I think these days I fall into the category of people, the elderly side as opposed to the young people side. And if I said, no, I'm not going to go into the tunnels, nobody would have looked at me like I was strange. It was, well, yeah, that makes sense. Look at you. You're like 1,000 years old. What are you doing going into the tunnels? But even if I wasn't shooting YouTube videos, I would still go into the tunnel because I want the whole experience. And I figured I'm in good enough physical condition. I shouldn't have a problem with it. So I went through the first couple of tunnels, and they were more difficult than I thought they would be. I do a lot of walking. I go up and down stairs all the time. I don't do anything strenuous. I'm not out. I don't work out. I don't go jogging. I don't do I don't do regular exercise, but I do a lot of walking. And I thought, okay, I'm in relatively good physical condition. This should not be a problem for me. But even getting through the first tunnels that were a little bit bigger and easier, it was hard. It was hard because they were designed for people to go through stooped over and not crawling, but on their feet, but bent over. And in a country like Vietnam, historically, people are more accustomed to sitting that way. Even in the markets here, you go out to the night market or something, you sit down to have something to eat. Well, you're sitting on a little stool that's this far off the ground, and your knees are bent. You go into the markets, and the women will sit with their knees, they're crouched, bent over, and they'll stay like that 10 hours a day, chopping vegetables and serving their customers. With this traditional agricultural lifestyle in Vietnam, people are just more accustomed to being bent over all the time. But me, I'm never bent over like that. I can only last a minute or so bent over like that, and then I run out of power. We sit on chairs, high, tall chairs, and I need a backrest. So anyway, I go down there and I have to bend way over because the tunnel is so low. And then I'm holding a GoPro with my right hand. And then by the time I got to the end of the tunnel, man, my thighs were on fire, just on fire. And I was so sweaty, so hot. And I felt like I lost energy because of a lack of oxygen. Because I don't think there was very much oxygen down there. We went into some other tunnels as well that were much longer. And I thought I could sense myself going a little bit faint from lack of oxygen. And to be honest, when we were even looking at the diorama, and then as we're walking down the trail, they showed us a little mound that looks like a termite hill, which basically was a termite hill. And then what the Viet Cong did was drill through the termite hill to make a little hole, and they drill all the way down into their tunnel complex. And these were their ventilation shafts to allow air to get into the tunnels. But I know a little bit about life. I know a little bit about tunnels. I've seen a lot of them. And in this case, I was comparing the Cu Chi tunnels to the Japanese tunnels that I saw in Padang, on Sumatra. There's this Japanese underground tunnel complex on a little peninsula off the city of Padang on the coast. And these tunnels were huge. So if I'm thinking about an underground military installation, that's what I'm thinking about. These Japanese tunnels went way underground. The very first tunnel that leads down to the complex was big enough to drive a truck through, or at least a Jeep through. And then you get all the way down to the bottom, and the tunnels underground were massive, like underground tunnels, again, that you could drive a truck through. And then off to the side, there'd be these huge, long tunnels, the big ones, and then other tunnels connecting them. And there would be like 15 of them in a row. And they were huge, cavernous, pretty much like underground caves. And that's where the Japanese stored all of their ammunition and their weapons, things like that, and their rations. And then they had other massive underground caves, 15 of them in a row, and those were their barracks. And for this giant underground complex, they had ventilation systems. Because this is what I'm thinking about, that any kind of a building, underground tunnel complex, anything, you need powerful ventilation to get air down there. And the Japanese engineers knew that, and they built into their system these tunnels blowing air underground. And they would have fans in there and a ventilation system, because that's the only way you could survive. You've got to blow air down there. So with all of this experience in my head, I was looking at the Kuchi tunnels and looking at those little pipes heading down into the tunnels. There's no way those little shafts are not providing enough air down here. So if the Viet Cong themselves were underground for long periods of time in those tunnels, it must have been tough. The heat and the crowding. Like I said, the Japanese tunnels were massive, bigger than any hallways you're going to find in a building. So they would have been quite comfortable underground. But these Viet Cong tunnels, I mean, everybody is just curled up into a ball, and they can't even stand up. They can't even kneel because these tunnels are so small, and the lack of oxygen down there must have been extreme. So I do not understand how those ventilation pipes were supposed to work. I don't think they would work. And it could have been my imagination, but I had this feeling like I was suffering from a lack of oxygen down there. So anyway, we went through a whole series of tunnels, and they got more and more difficult as you went along, longer and smaller. And then by the time I got to the end, the last tunnel, to be honest, I should not have gone in, because I came out of a couple of these tunnels early on, and my thighs were done. I couldn't use my thighs anymore. They were just useless. So I could not crouch down, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not kneel, but anyway, I couldn't crouch down and then get back up again. I couldn't. My thighs would not support my weight anymore. I was physically done. But I mean, yeah, if I did crouch down, someone would have had to come and pull me back to my feet, because I would not have been able to get back up on my own. It's pretty funny. So anyway, the last tunnel, to be honest, I should not have gone in at all. But then I thought, well, come on, you can do it. Like, don't be a wimp. So I did go into the tunnel, and I made sure to be the last person in the tunnel, because I knew I was going to have to go slowly. And I didn't want to have people in my group behind me, because if I needed to rest, I wanted to be able to just stop for a while and rest, catch my breath, let my muscles recover. And I didn't want people behind me like forcing me to continue. So I made sure I was the very last person. And as I said, my thighs were done. I could not go through on my feet anymore, just couldn't do it. So what I did was I crawled. I got into the tunnel, and again, I've still got my GoPro in one hand, which is one of the reasons I was so tired, because I didn't even have the full use of my hands and balance. I had the GoPro in front of me, and that made it even harder. And I was slamming my head against the top of the tunnel all the time, because I was just way too tall to go down there. But for the very last tunnel, I had to crawl on my hands and knees the whole way through, because my thighs couldn't support me anymore. And I had to rest a lot, and I had sweat pouring down my face. And I mean, it was it was like getting touch and go whether I was going to make it to the end or not. And this last tunnel actually was divided into two sections, the first half and the second half. And before we went in there, the guide gave us another speech about, okay, think this through if you want to go in there, because the second half is left original. It's the same size as it was for the Viet Cong. So you big gangly foreigner dudes, you're going to have more trouble in this tunnel than in any of the other ones. And it was the last tunnel, so it was going to be tough. And he said, though, if you get halfway, there's going to be someone in there with you, guiding you, and he will tell you that if you can't make it, there's an escape route. So you go halfway, then comes the difficult part. And if you decide you can't make it, you can go to the left, and there's another tunnel. It's going to take you back to the surface. So if you get to that point and you're in trouble, you can escape out the side. So I thought, okay, let's give this a try. And I got to that point, and I'm looking at that tunnel going off to the left and thinking, okay, an intelligent person would bail at this point. You gotta get out, because this is ridiculous. I'm moving on hands and knees, 2 knees in one hand, my left hand, because I'm still holding the GoPro, and I'm lurching along really, really slowly. My pants got covered in dirt. I was so dirty, hot, and sweaty. And then I did make it to the end, but man, it was hard, and catching my breath was hard. And then the next day, the rest of that day, and then the next day back in my hotel in Ho Chi Minh City, I went out to a museum that's right, I went to McDonald's. There's one in District 1 near my hotel, and this McDonald's was on 2 or 3 floors, so I placed my order down on the first floor, and then I had to get up to the second floor because I was going to look for a table there. And I had a heck of a time getting up those stairs. I had to hold on to the banister and just pull myself up hand over hand because my legs were finished. I couldn't bend my legs, my thighs wouldn't work. And after I finished my McDonald's lunch, it was so hard getting down those stairs. It was embarrassing because my legs were like iron. The muscles were just locked up solid. And then I couldn't bend anything. So I'm holding onto the handrail, and I'm just sort of like step by step, lurching down the steps. And it was really hard to get. And it took, 3-4 days before I was recovered enough to be able to go up and down stairs again. So my experience in the tunnels was that difficult. Embarrassing but true stories from Planet Doug. So, yeah, I was talking to some other people in my group. There were a couple other Canadians in my group, and they were older than I was. So these people, I'm guessing they were in their late 70s, maybe early 80s. I think that's pushing it. Let's say somewhere in mid to late 70s. And just walking with them and talking with them, yeah, they were classic elderly. And then there was some discussion about whether the man in particular, was he going to try one of the tunnels or not? And he was talking about it with his wife, and I was sort of part of this conversation, I think. And then by the time I came out of the very first tunnel, he decided not to go in, and I came out of the first tunnel, and I spoke to them, and I said, yeah, very wise choice. You did not want to go down there. You know, I told them how hard I found it to get through those tunnels. And just based on looking at them and their mobility and how they talked about their physical health, he would not have been able to make it through, I didn't think. And I was talking with a young guy in, where was I? In Kanto. I went down to this other Mekong River Delta town for about 10 days, and I met this young guy there. And he took me on a tour of the night market, and I was chatting with him during the night market. We were talking about the Cu Chi tunnels, and he said he went there with his school group. And this is when he was in high school, so he would have been 16, 17 years old, prime of physical life. And he said in his group, someone kind of passed out in the middle of the tunnel. So he was in there with his whole class going through the tunnel, lots of people behind him, and then a girl in front of him couldn't make it. She passed out, collapsed, couldn't make it through the tunnel, and she was a high school student. And then he was stuck. He couldn't go forward because the tunnel was blocked because this girl was in trouble, and then all the people had come in behind him. So he was stuck in the tunnel for a long time until they got a rescue team to come into the tunnel and get that girl and get her out of there. So yeah, I mean, I'm making it sound like miles of tunneling underground, but it wasn't. It really was. These were short sections of tunnel. I don't want to give the impression that they were anything more than what they were. These were short underground sections of tunnel, not really that hard. But how low they are, forcing you to bend over as much as you do, and my lack of conditioning made it quite difficult. Quite difficult indeed. One more tunnel-related story. I mentioned at the very beginning the story about all the thumbnails, and all the thumbnails are people going into that trap door and holding the door over their head. I also went into that one, and that one was pretty tough as well, physically and mentally, because the entrance into the tunnel was very small. As I discovered when I went into it, it was narrower than my shoulders. And I'm not exactly hulking out here, obviously. I don't have big, broad shoulders, but my shoulders would not fit through the trap door. It had a wooden frame around it, and then when I tried to get into it, you would get stuck in it like a cork in a bottle. It was that narrow. And a bunch of people in my group tried to go in, and they bailed partway through. So they would say, oh yeah, I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna go in. And then they step into this trapdoor entrance, and then they start to go down, but then they panic as soon as they feel how tight it is. And you can't see where you're going beneath you, and you have a feeling like that tunnel is going to be as small as this entrance. And if you force yourself through the opening, you're going to be stuck in the tunnel. It had an incredibly claustrophobic feeling to it. It really did. And person after person in our group and in other groups that I saw tried to go into that, and they got part way in and they started to feel the constriction, and then they panicked and says, no, I'm not doing it, and they got out before they went in. So I saw this happen a lot, and I was thinking, oh boy, this I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this or not. I'm not thrilled at tight spaces. I don't have claustrophobia, but I've had a lifelong interest in survival stories. So I track them down whenever I come across them. I read books about survival stories, whether they're mountaineering, caving, going into the Arctic, getting lost in the woods, anything like that. I read all these stories. So I know a lot about people who've gotten stuck in caves. They try to go through a narrow passageway, and then they get stuck and they end up basically dying there, even with people with them, because they can't pull them out, and they can't go back, they can't go forward. So yeah, I have these images in my head. So I'm looking at all these people freaking out at this little tourist attraction tunnel, and I'm thinking, man, that's something. So anyway, it became my turn. And every time I went into one of the tunnels, I went through the same routine. I had to give my reading glasses to someone else because I couldn't have these dangling around my neck. And then my knapsack with all my camera gear, I would give it to someone else. Like, would you mind holding on to this while I go in? And I don't know how the other people in my group viewed me, but I did, on this tunnel in particular, I got the impression that they looked at me as an old man in the group. Like, he's the old man of our group. I wasn't the oldest, but I was an old man in their group. And then when I went through one of the tunnels, people were like, yay, applauding because I did it. And if I were 18 years old, like, I wouldn't get applause. So people seemed to think it was something special that I was getting through these tunnels at my advanced age, which I thought was kind of funny. But anyway, I got that feeling in this tunnel in particular, but I wanted to make sure I knew what I was getting myself into. So I spoke to the guide and said, okay, like, everybody is getting stuck like what happens if you actually go through? Like, where do you go after you get in? Once I get past the entrance, what do I do? And the guy says, oh, there's a tunnel right there. You just go in, turn right, and it's just like the other tunnels. But I'm looking at that entrance, and I'm thinking, man, that's not like the other tunnels. That's like half the size of the other tunnels. But then I stuck my head inside, and that was the difference for me, I think, because I looked and I could see, oh, once you pop through the door, there's a very short section, very, very small, and then it opens up into a regular tunnel, and then I could see the entrance to the actual underground tunnel that leads to the exit. So I thought, okay, the hard part is getting through the door. But once you're through the trap door, then you can squeeze through there and then you're in the tunnel. So I had the psychological advantage that I could see how it worked. So anyway, I got into the tunnel and I was so busy with just fitting my shoulders through, because as I said, I couldn't fit through normally, so I had to go in diagonally. I had to twist my shoulders so that my shoulders went corner to corner, and then I could fit through. And I'm holding the GoPro and everything like that. So I did not think to get the classic image. Nobody gave me the trap door to hold above my head and then put it back into place as I go underground. So I don't have that classic image of any kind. But I went in and I twisted my shoulders sideways, diagonally, and then popped through. And then I managed to get through the tiny section. And then I went through the regular tunnel. And then at the far end, the exit was exactly the same as the entrance. It was, again, you had to wiggle your way into a very narrow tunnel, go upwards, and then you had the square opening. And for me to get through the square, my shoulders like wouldn't fit through again, and I had to twist diagonally and then come up through there. And that's when my whole group was standing in a circle around the exit, and then everybody's like, hey, he didn't die. You know, the old man from Canada didn't die. Let's applaud his achievement. He made it through the tunnels. So I thought that was pretty funny. And then I got my reading glasses back, and I got my knapsack back, and we went through the rest of the tunnels. So yeah, that was quite an experience. I don't think I had that much trouble back in 1995. I went through all the tunnels back then, I'm pretty sure. And back then, it would have been a lot easier with my younger thighs back in those days. But old man Doug thighs were not up to the challenge of the coochie tunnels on this experience. That was quite something. A couple more stories from the coochie tunnels. After all the tunnels going underground, then we went through a section of displays about the medical center, how they cared for the wounded underground, all the booby traps. Those are quite famous, those images of the booby traps that the Viet Cong would make. And then the tour of coochie tunnels was over, but now came an optional thing where we could fire a gun. And this wasn't part of Coochie Tunnels itself. So that complex, the tour of that was over. We all got back into the bus. We exited the Coochie Tunnels area, and then we drove to a military gun range. And at this place, if you wanted to, you could pay to shoot a gun. And as it turned out, the way it works is you can choose what gun you want. They had all kinds of guns. When you go in, there's a desk where you pay, of course, and there's a chart on the wall, and you can choose to shoot an AK-47, the American M16, a machine gun, probably pistols, rifles, single-shot sniper rifles, I don't know. I was focused on two of them. I was focused on the AK-47 or the M16. Those were the two classic weapons for me of the Vietnam War and Vietnam War movies. And I remember from going there in 1995, I didn't do it. I didn't feel any particular desire to do it. And I'm always traveling on a very low budget. So back in 1995, I would have had very little money, and I wouldn't have been able to afford to pay to shoot the gun anyway. And I think back in those days, I might have had the feeling that it was a bit gaudy to do it, that somehow the paying to shoot a gun felt like something some sort of a Yahoo would do, like go get drunk and shoot a gun. It just didn't seem like my kind of experience back then. So I never did it. This time, again, under the influence of being a YouTuber, I thought, well, it is expensive. And to be honest, I didn't want to spend the money to do it. But I thought, well, I'm here shooting a video. You have to do all of it. Whatever the experience is on the tour, I should do that experience. And again, it's going to be very visual. Though now that the tour is over, I haven't edited the video yet. It's coming up. I'm still working on videos. I'm wondering whether I can even include it in the video or not, because YouTube is very sensitive to any kind of gun-related content. So now, even though I paid to shoot a gun, and I have video of me shooting a gun, and I think it will be very interesting video, and I really want to put it in. It was a highlight of the day. I'm wondering if I do put it in, the video could be demonetized by YouTube, could be deleted by YouTube. And when you upload videos to YouTube, you have to sign off on, you have to rate your own video and say, and talk about whether or not it is advertiser friendly or not. So you have to judge your own video, sort of a, it's on an honor system. And then it says, whatever, profanity, sexual content. And I just go down the list, obviously, and I go, no, 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 no. I don't have anything like that in any of my videos. My life doesn't involve any of those things, including guns, firearms, explosives. I always just go, no, 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 no. But in this case, this video, well, it's me shooting a gun, but it's at a tourist attraction, part of a historical experience. It's informative, and it's not meant for teaching people how to use these weapons or anything like that. So I'm wondering, how does that fall into the terms of use, the guidelines for YouTube? I'm still not really clear about that. But anyway, I didn't think of that at the time. I was just thinking, oh, I'm shooting a video, I should do this. And it costs 60,000 dong per bullet and a minimum of 10 bullets. And you have to use all 10 bullets in one gun. Those are the rules. So minimum 600,000 dong to fire 10 bullets in one of the guns. If you want to use two different guns, you would have to pay 1.2 million dong, because you have to pay for 20 bullets, 10 in each. You can't take your 10 bullets and divide them up over many guns. You have to shoot them all in one gun. So anyway, I'm looking at the list and I'm hemming and hawing, M16, AK-47, and eventually I went for, of course, I went for the AK-47 because that was the classic gun of the Viet Cong. These were the Viet Cong tunnels. I should shoot an AK-47. So I paid 600,000 dong, and then I went through 2 or 3 other people in my group also paid to do it. And I didn't realize this at the time, but everybody else in my tour group, they came in with us, but they went up onto the 2nd floor, and there was an observation platform. So everybody in my group was up above us watching us shoot the guns, and they were all taking video of us using their smartphones. And later on, when we were on the bus going back to Ho Chi Minh City, a couple of the people around me handed me their phones and said, hey, here's the video of you shooting. I was like, what do you mean? How do you have video of me shooting? So yeah, we were in this observation area and we shot video. So I got to watch a video of me shooting these guns, gun, only one. And I had video of my own experience because I gave my GoPro to another man from our tour. I think he helped me out a couple of times actually. And I just asked him, like, would you mind taking video of me while I shoot this AK-47? And again, it reminds me of things I've said about riding a scooter. You go to a country like Vietnam and you rent a scooter and you're driving the scooter through the mountains and you feel like a real bad guy. You feel cool. You think you must look so amazing. It's like, I'm riding my motorcycle through Vietnam. I must look really cool. And then you see the video or any photos of yourself and you do not look cool in any way. You look like a dork because that little helmet on your head looks dorky. The scooter looks too small. I'm all hunched over it like a giant praying mantis. I do not look cool sitting on the scooter, and I certainly do not look as cool as I think I do. And then there I am at this gun range, and I'm shooting an AK-47, thinking, man, this must look bad. I must look pretty cool firing my AK-47. However, a couple of problems with that scenario when I was looking at the video. One is that because of safety concerns, the guns are wired into place. You can lift them a little bit, but they're held in place with metal chains and wires. So you can't actually, they don't hand you a gun and then you can turn the gun and point it in any direction. No, the gun is sort of semi-fixed in place. It's like on a ledge, and then you can pick up the gun, but then it hits the end of the chain because you're not supposed to be able to move it very far. It's limited in its movements. But as with most things in the world, doorways, tunnels, bathroom mirrors, AK-47s, they're designed for people that are shorter than me. So the limit of the movement is meant for somebody who's 7 inches shorter than I am. So I tried to lift the gun up to my eye, but I can't lift it that high. Oh, shoot. So I could not stand naturally holding the gun. I had to bend over. I'd like scrunch down and bend over in order to shoot the gun. So I did not look anywhere near as cool as I thought I did. But anyway, the experience itself was interesting on many different levels. I think I was the first in our group to shoot. We went down there. There were 3 or 4 of us, as I said, who paid to do it. And there was sort of a moment where we all looked at each other. Okay, who's first? Who's first? And then since I was going to shoot video, I thought, okay, I'll go first, and just to get me out of the way. And I handed the GoPro to this other guy. Would you mind shooting video? And then I got the gun. They gave us ear protectors, and the ear protectors were essential, and they were very good. Man, I could use a pair of those in these hotel rooms when they have screaming children, because I put those things on and it was like the world vanished. Couldn't hear a thing. Yeah, they were very, very effective ear protectors. So we all put those on, and then I fired the gun, and 2 things surprised me about the gun. I talk about it in the video as well, so I'm repeating myself here. One, there was very little recoil. I don't have a lot of experience with guns, but I've shot a couple in my lifetime. I've shot rifles and shotguns and pistols, not many times in my life, but I've done it back in Canada. And my memory of every one of those occasions is that the recoil nearly took my shoulder off. If someone who knows what they're talking about is training you and showing you what to do with a shotgun or something like that, they'll tell you, snug the butt of the gun up against your shoulder, pull it in hard against your shoulder. You don't want any gap there, because when you pull the trigger, the recoil is so powerful. If you leave the butt of the gun away from your shoulder, it's gonna slam backwards and hit your shoulder like a battering ram, like boom. So that you have to really hold it against your body. So I'm used to this idea of recoil. So I pulled this AK-47 against my shoulder. I tried to anyway. I tried to think about doing that. And then there's no recoil, very little anyway. I was like, oh, that was really smooth. That surprised me. I was expecting a military assault rifle. It's going to be far more powerful than anything I've shot in my life. So the recoil is really going to be something. But there really wasn't much recoil at all. But the percussion, what's the word I'm looking for? The sound of it was startling. And sort of a shock wave that hit my body. So firing it was like boom, like it hit you like a shock wave, and the sound of it, the feeling of it was very, very strong. And after I eventually fired all 10, I really had this idea that being a soldier firing one of these weapons in battle must have been emotionally draining. I shot 10 bullets, and the percussion, what's the word I'm looking for? The shock wave, just the feeling of it was kind of overwhelming. And can you imagine being in a battle where there's 100 of soldiers on your side firing these weapons all around you, and the enemy firing their weapons and artillery shells, things like that, all going off around you? That wave, those, and they would have had the noise of it as well. They weren't wearing hearing protectors. I can see that leading to a certain mental breakdown. You hear about shell shock. You heard about that with World War I and World War II. Not so much in Vietnam for some reason. That term seemed to go out of fashion. But from World War II, you heard a lot about shell shock, that after men were in a lot of these battles, just the thumping percussion of all these just led to like a mental breakdown that they called shell shock. And I was like, wow, I can understand that now. I could understand how soldiers would end up in their trenches, just sort of curled up in a ball and covering their head and their ears just because of that, the constant gunfire. Anyway, maybe I'm overstating it, but it was a fascinating physical experience to be firing that gun. And going all the way back to the beginning, I mentioned this story that our guide told us about how the AK-47 was so superior to the M16 because the M16 would jam all the time. So there I am shooting the AK-47, and it jammed. Out of 10 bullets, it jammed twice. So I was like, okay, that is ironic. Is that I think it was ironic. I don't know if you say it jammed, but it misfired. So you get 10 bullets, and I think I shot one, and then the second one, nothing happened. So I clicked, I pulled the trigger, and nothing happened. And then there was a soldier there standing beside me who's supervising all of this, and then he instantly reached in and he grabbed the bolt of the rifle and then pulled it, ejected that shell, and then handed it back to me, and I kept firing. And then there's another misfire, and he grabbed it, ejected that shell. And I guess I shot 8 of them, and I got to the end of 8, and then he grabbed the gun and put 2 new ones in, because I paid for 10. There were 2 misfires, so he put 2 in at the end, and I got to shoot 2 more times. And that experience also made me think about the skill and the practice and the training that it takes to be a soldier, because I was there firing a gun, and I fired 8 shots, and by the time I got to the 8th one, I realized I had no idea how many times I'd pulled the trigger. No idea at all. And you see that in movies all the time. It always happens, the classic dramatic scene where you've got 6 bullets in a revolver, and then you're firing at the enemy, and then you're not sure if you have any bullets left or not. Like, how many did I shoot? Did I shoot 3, 5, 6, 20? You just don't know, and you always think, well, you should have been counting so you know how many bullets you have left. You always look at the hero in the movie and you think, oh, what a dummy. He should have counted. But there I was in a calm environment shooting this rifle, and just the percussion, the noise, the experience, everything about it, I completely lost track. I had no idea how many shots I had taken. And I was thinking I should count, and yet I completely lost track. And that was in a calm environment. And I realized that I was barely even aiming for the target. So there I was shooting a rifle. I didn't even know how many shots I had taken. And then by the time I got to number 10, it was like, oh, I was supposed to be aiming for the target. I was aiming. I remember aiming. I know a little bit about the sights and how the sights work. And I saw my bullets hit. I saw them hit way down at the end of the range. But in terms of really aiming for the target, to be honest, I wasn't as focused on that as a good soldier should have been. So I started to think about what it would take to be cool-headed enough in a real battle to be firing one of these weapons, remember how many shots you've taken, to just keep your cool, and to be able to aim. Me, probably, I would have been the worst soldier. Based on my experience at the Cu-Chi tunnels, I would have been the worst soldier in history, because I would have popped up out of the tunnel and just gone, just firing like a crazy person. And then my superior officer would have come over, Doug, what are you firing at? I'm probably like firing into the air or something. Like, will you please aim? Oh, yeah, I'm supposed to aim. I got distracted. I forgot I'm supposed to be aiming at something. So it was I've talked about this in the past. It's one of the few things I've learned in life, that logic can only take you so far. So if you're thinking about what something feels like or what an experience is like, logic and information, you think you can imagine what that experience would be like. Like, you don't have to do it. It's like, I know what it's like to be a soldier. I can imagine. No, you can't. Until you actually are there firing one of these guns, you don't know what it's like, and you don't know the emotional effect it's going to have on you until you do it yourself. And I think that is true across everything in life. It's probably the only thing I've learned in 61 years. It's the only thing I've learned in my life, is that your brain is not as powerful as you think it is in terms of understanding situations. The only way to learn and the only way to understand is to actually do it yourself. That's the only way. And that was very true here. I said there were 2 more stories from the Cu-Chi tunnels. That was one of them, the firing range story. And the last one, shorter story, is that we were all finished. The other people fired their weapons. One guy had a 360 camera. I noticed him holding on to this Insta360. I don't know whether it was an X2 or X3. Maybe I asked him, I can't remember. But he was gonna fire his guns, and then I was standing there, and then I offered to hold his camera for him. I think maybe he handed it to me. Just maybe he asked me, I can't remember. But anyway, I ended up holding the 360 camera, and I knew enough about cameras. I knew I didn't have to aim it. I can see someone who doesn't know what a 360 camera is, like wandering around and zooming in and doing that with the 360 camera. But of course, you don't need to do that. All you have to do is hold it in one place, and then it will be filming everything all the time. So I did that for him. And then we all got back in the bus, and we left from the military gun range, and we're heading down the roads. We're on our way back to Ho Chi Minh City, and then a woman on our bus, a woman from India, there's a group of 3 or 4 women traveling together, all from India. She suddenly piped up and said she didn't have her phone anymore. She'd lost her phone. And she was sitting in a seat opposite me, and I heard them talking about it, and she was going through all her bags, going through all her friends' bags, going through her pockets, going through everything. And then you can hear the panic building in her voice until they finally concluded somehow or other her phone was gone, and she didn't know where it was. So then she spoke to the guide, and to his credit and to the credit of the tour company, without hesitation, turned the bus around. So, okay, we'll go find it. And I guess she had some kind of maybe they had a tracking app on the phone, I'm not really sure, but her memory, she could remember, okay, I had the phone up until here. I remember taking a picture there. After that, I'm not sure. So there were 2 places where her phone could be, at this kind of rest area, at the end of the Cu-Chi tunnels, or at the gun range. And then the guide just turned the whole bus around, went back to Cu-Chi tunnels, convinced the guards to let us back in again. And then we went to where she thought the phone might be. She and her friends all got off the bus and they looked everywhere. Couldn't find it, they came back on. And then we drove back into the gun range, and then they left the bus again to go looking. And they were gone quite a while. I was surprised how long this took. But then they came back and I saw smiles. So I was like, oh, thank goodness. And she had left her, I think it was an iPhone, and she had just put it down in the gun range, like the observation deck. They were all sitting up there watching us shoot the guns. And I guess she put her phone down, probably shot some video, took pictures, put her phone down, and then when they left, she just left it there. And luckily for her, by the time we got back, it was still there. And she managed to get her phone back. So that was the other big experience from that day. Yeah, I was so happy for her. I couldn't imagine. You're in the middle of a holiday, everything is going great, and then out of the blue, it's like you lose your phone, and your phone has your entire life on it. Well, like, what a way to, it would be such a terrible way to end that day. And yeah, she got it back. So I felt great relief on her behalf. I'm very glad myself that I have two main phones. I mean, if I lost one of these, I would be devastated, but at least I would still be able to do things because I have another phone. The one time I was in Sumatra and I lost a phone, it was stolen, and that was my very, very, very first smartphone I ever had in my life. I was just learning how to use it. I was just getting used to it, and then it was stolen in Sumatra, and then I went into a panic because I didn't really know how smartphones worked back in those days, and I didn't have any other way. It's not like I lose this phone and then I can just grab my second phone, change all my passwords, and still cancel things and do things, send emails, send messages. I had no phone at all. My phone was stolen, and then I was like, what do I do? Yeah, total panic. And I think this woman, in her case, she was with friends. That helps a lot. When I was in Sumatra and I had my phone stolen, I was there by myself, of course, and had nobody to help me out, no one to rely on. I remember on that day, to tell a little bit of that story, I was on my bicycle at the time, and I rode my bike to immigration, the immigration office, and I happened to go by an English school. And I'd stopped off at the English school because I just like meeting English teachers. So I popped into the school and I was just chatting with people there. I chatted with the woman at the front desk. It's like, hi, I'm a dumb tourist from Canada, and I used to be an English teacher, and tell me about your school. And I chatted with her in English for a little while, just for fun. And then I went on about my day, and then I was coming back on my bicycle, and I was right beside this English school, and that's when my phone was stolen. A guy on a motorcycle came up beside me, reached over, snatched my phone, and took off. And I couldn't catch up with him on my bicycle, so my phone was gone. And I'm panicking, and I'm thinking, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? I'm not good in an emergency. Again, that's something that ties in with what I was saying about how you have to experience something to really understand it. And I think every man likes to think that they would be very cool, capable, and organized in an emergency, like Jason Bourne, like James Bond, that in any kind of emergency, we're going to be able to think, get things done, do the right thing. And apparently I'm not Jason Bourne, because my phone was stolen and I was just like a gibbering wreck. I was like, I didn't know what to do. I had no clue what to do. And the first thing I saw was the English school, and I thought, oh, call the police. We got to get the police. And I thought, oh, they'll help me out. So the first thing I did was ride my bike into the school, and I went in, the people that I'd spoken to, and I was sort of expecting them to swing into action. I was going to go in and say, someone just stole my phone. And they were going to leap up and call the police, and there was going to be, the cavalry was going to be on its way. And they just kind of looked at me like, I said, no, someone just, my phone, they took it. What, can you call the police for me? Can you help me? And they just looked at me like, maybe we know what you're talking about, but we don't know who you are, and there's nothing we can do. And they just sort of stared at me, and it was like, yeah, okay, I'm alone here. Yeah, when you're alone, you think you're okay. It's like, oh yeah, I'm fine on my own, no problem. Yes, you're fine on your own until something goes wrong. And then when something goes wrong, it's like, sure would have been nice to have someone here with me in this particular moment. Because the people at the school, just, they weren't of any help. And then I left from the school. They didn't call the police. I didn't know how to call the police. Probably calling the police would have done nothing anyway. But then I thought, well, I'm on my bicycle. Why don't I just ride down the road in the direction that there's two guys on a motorcycle. They went in two different directions. And I thought, well, why don't I chase down one of them? Who knows? Maybe I can catch up with the guy. So I go down there. And then there was a couple of security guards outside the building, like parking lot security guards kind of guys. And I thought, oh, they can tell me. And I go up to them and I'm trying to explain to them in English. And did you see a man on a motorcycle go by? So, right? Yes, he would have seen a man on a scooter go by. He would have seen 1,000 of them go by. It's not like he's going to be able to help me out in any way. So somehow, I don't know, because I was in the middle of an emergency, I just assumed everyone around me would leap to my aid. But in real life, sure, people want to help you, but there's nothing they can do. Maybe in the movies, when someone grabs your wallet or grabs your phone and runs, you can chase them down. And in movies, somehow they can always see the person. They chase them and chase them and chase them, and they can see everywhere they go. But in real life, in any of these Asian cities, someone grabs your phone, they're gone. They're gone in seconds. You'll never see where they went. They turn one corner, and you can turn that corner a second after them. You're not going to see them. It's not like in the movies, you see somebody chasing a thief, right? Stop, thief! Stop that man! Stop that man! And everybody turns and looks, and they all see the thief, and they see you running after the thief, and it's all very dramatic. And then maybe somebody will trip the thief or grab them or tackle them or do something to help you. But in real life, nobody saw the thief take your phone. Nobody was paying attention. And if you're running and screaming, stop that man, nobody's going to know what you're talking about. And the crowds of people around you are just going to, they won't have seen anything. And you're going to turn the very first corner and the thief is just gone. There's nothing you can do about it. So until you experience it yourself, you don't know how you would react. Yeah, you really don't. Anyway, I guess I went off on that tangent thinking about this poor woman losing her phone and my sense of relief on her behalf, and the fact that she was with friends helped her out a lot. And that made me think about the difference it would have been if you're on your own and you only have one phone and you lose that one phone. It's very different from having two phones or being with friends who can step in and help you out a little bit. So yeah, it's good to have friends. It's good to have friends sometimes. And for behind the scenes, that is it for today, of course. Well, not of course, it's just that I've been talking for a long time. I can feel it in my throat. I think it's better if I do this in the morning because it's easier to speak and tell stories. It's a little bit harder in the afternoon for some reason, and my throat gets sore, but it doesn't get sore in the morning if I do this. But anyway, I do have other things I want to talk about. Yeah, maybe I'll tell this one last YouTube related thing, and then that will be the end of behind the scenes, because this is something that I just did today, and as soon as I stop recording this video, I'm going to do it. I'm going to continue with it. And this is, YouTube has added a new feature I don't know how long ago this was added, but I only became aware of my ability to do it a short time ago. And this is, you can now make 3 different thumbnails for your video, and YouTube will automatically use the 3 thumbnails for the same video and monitor which one is the most effective. So you can use this system to test what kind of thumbnail you should make. If you have ideas about, okay, this kind of thumbnail, that one, and now you can actually do a scientific experiment to see which thumbnail is more effective in terms of getting people to click on your video. So that has been an interesting experience. Right now, I took my video about the Mekong Delta day tour and I divided it up into 3 parts. It's a long video. The whole video is about 1 hour and 45 minutes long. So I decided to divide it up into 3 parts, part 1, part 2, part 3. And today I hope to be posting part 1. And I made 3 different thumbnails for it. And I'm very curious to see what happens. I think if you are someone who is watching this behind the scenes video and you got this far into one of my videos, I don't think it matters what kind of thumbnail I use for any of my videos. If I post a video and you're interested in watching some of it or all of it, you're going to click on it. If you're a behind the scenes video watcher, you're probably going to click on one of my Planet Doug videos anyway. You may not watch all of it or even very much of it, but chances are the thumbnail for you is going to be relatively irrelevant. But if YouTube takes one of my videos and spreads it out over a general population of people who don't know who I am, have never watched one of my videos, who knows, maybe the thumbnail choice can be very effective. So that's what I'm doing right now. And for parts 1 and 3, I already made 3 thumbnails for each one, and I'm going to do the same thing for part 2. So the thumbnails that I've chosen for part 1, I'll put them on here on the video and you can see them. I chose 3 different ones. One was from a picture that I took. It's a selfie with me and our guide, Hui. I like the picture because, my experience with videos in general is that having a picture of the YouTuber in the thumbnail, people like that because it tells them, oh, this is a story about that person in Vietnam, rather than just a landscape picture. A picture of a person always seems to be more effective. So it's a selfie of me with the guide, and we're on the boat in the Mekong Delta. So that's thumbnail number 1. But on this first part of the video, the biggest experience, or the most visually dramatic, was visiting a snake farm where we got to put a big python around our neck. So the second thumbnail is a picture of the guide at the snake farm, and she has the python around her neck. And that was my original thumbnail. That was the one I chose. I like that image the best. But then, because I'm doing a test, I made a 3rd thumbnail, and the 3rd one is a picture of me with the python around my neck. So those are the 3 thumbnails. Me and the guide on the boat, a guide with a python, and then me with a python. And I'm curious to see which thumbnail turns out to be the most popular to a general audience. My guess, of course, is that it's going to be the picture of me with the python. That seems the most logical. The one I like the best is the picture of the guide with the python, because it seems very egotistical and arrogant to always put yourself in the thumbnail. Every video is a picture of you somewhere exotic, So to be honest, my instinct is always to use a thumbnail of something else, not me, something else. But I end up using a lot of pictures of me just because it's clear on YouTube that that's what people respond to. They want to see, oh, it's a video about this person in Vietnam, and then they're more interested in it. So that seems to be a rule of thumb for thumbnails. So I do use a lot of photos of me now, but that's not my instinct. My instinct is to use pictures of other things. But anyway, we'll see whether the picture of me with the guide or the picture of the snake guide will be the most effective thumbnail. And I'm going to do the same thing for part 2 and part 3. So it's just a little interesting side note about YouTube videos on Planet Doug. So that is definitely it. I'm done shutting down now for the afternoon. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.